And Rebecca Root is here, along with Dr. Clara Barker, a scientist at Oxford University and transgender campaigner, whose work has been praised by Theresa May. Also with us, two feminists who don't believe trans women should be allowed into women's-only spaces. Sarah Dighton is a journalist who writes for the New Statesman magazine and The Guardian, and has written about transgender issues. And Dr. Nicola Williams is spokesperson for Fair Play for Women. That's a women's rights organisation. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Nicola and Sarah, let's cut to the chase. What is the worry about trans women coming into women's spaces like female changing rooms, ladies' loos, women's hospital wards?
I mean, just clarify maybe what you've said there is we're not against trans women coming into women's spaces in all cases. It's just about, in some instances, because there are differences between biological women...
I'm going to pause you. I think your microphone might not be working. Is that right? Oh, no, we can hear it, yeah. Sorry, carry on. I beg your pardon, Nicola. I don't want to miss what you're saying.
So, biological women, there are differences between biological women and trans women. And so in some instances where biological sex really matters, for example, in a women's refuge, then that would be a case where the Equality Act, single-sex exemptions should be allowed to go forward, and that should be biological women only. So,
right.
whereas issues like toilets, other things, are less important, and I think it trivialises some of the issues.
And what is the worry? What's the concern? Spell it out.
The concern is biological women are different to trans women, and trans women have been born male, and so women need to be reassured about that if trans women come in, because although you know, we all think about transsexual people having operations, but actually the majority of transgender people nowadays actually still retain a penis. So these people are biologically still male, despite identifying as female.
I'm going to ask Sarah, because I still don't know what the worry is.
One of the big worries is the potential for exploitation. So if you move to a model of self-identity, the idea within self-identity is that you are a man or a woman because you say you're a man or a woman, and no one else has got the right to question it. That's a real problem, because it means that there are going to be men who will exploit that. There will be men who are predatory, who will exploit that to gain access to spaces. We have already seen that in prisons. There have been male prisons who have identified as women, been moved into the female estate, and it's Paris Green, in fact, is the name of one particular example, housed in the female estate, had to be moved out because of sexually predatory behaviour towards women. And that's really troubling, and we need to have a system that is stronger than self-identification to protect women and trans women against cases like that.
OK. Rebecca Root and Clara Barker, do you understand that concern?
Yes, I do, but I mean, it's like you're tarring the whole community of trans women with the brush of one or two people who are bad people and are in prison because they've committed crimes. So it's like saying, you know, every priest is a bad person because one or two, maybe more, committed offences against young people, for example. So you can't paint everybody with the same brush.
This is a risk to women and trans women. Male violence is the problem that we're all facing. The problem is sexually predatory men, violent men. That's an issue for all of us, and we need a system of gender recognition that protects every one of us around this table from that.
But what we do need to remember is that 90% at least of sexual assaults are carried out by people that already know the survivor. So I'm not sure how self-identification is going to change that.
Well, it's going to make a difference to that 10%.
Yeah, and self-identification means anyone can self-identify as transgenders. That's the issue. We're not scared of transgender people. We're being cautious of the fact that anyone, any man, can self-identify as a woman and be...
And if you're caught doing that, if it's false, then there is a criminal penalty up to 2 years in prison.
I mean, how do you prove that someone is lying about their identity? I can't... If we move to a situation where self-identity is the rule, then it's impossible to say to somebody, you don't sincerely identify as that. I can't, adjudicate on someone's internal state.
Is the proposal not that there is still going to be some, what they call checks and balances, that so people who are self-identifying still have to demonstrate a commitment to the new identity? I mean, you're not going to say that the lads who put a sort of a ballet tutu on and hop on a flight to you know, Amsterdam for a stag weekend are then going to say
That's
that
the
I'm
issue,
female,
because
are they?
They could say.
But nobody
they are,
will
but
take
they could.
that seriously.
Wouldn't they? Can women actually say when a man walks into the toilets in this environment now? Are women feeling confident enough to say, "Excuse me, you're a man, can you leave?" Because if that man says, "Well, actually, I identify as a woman," there's no other proof required.
Answer that point.
Yeah,
That very specific example.
This isn't a case of trans women and men walking into the bathroom. This is whether you look like a woman or whether you look like a man. This is what you're policing. There are cisgendered women who walk into bathrooms who look and appear male and are kicked out of those bathrooms. Also, if we're going to say that we're going to go on biological sex, then what about trans men that are going into female bathrooms? What then?
Well, trans men have got every reason to be anxious about male violence in the same way as all of us. And there
you're
are
saying
cases.
they should go into the male
well,
bathroom.
I'm saying there are cases where I'm saying trans men have got every reason to be anxious about male violence. Because if they're read as female and they're in the male toilets, then they may very well be assaulted. That is the thing that happens because the major source of violence in our society is men.
Has that happened?
I mean, I'm 100% sure that I could dig one out. I can't give you...
Because Paris Lee says in the film that Rebecca Root made, there is a parallel between this kind of conversation and the public conversations that used to go on around gay men using male change.
Absolutely not. This is very, very, very different.
Hang on, let me just finish the sentence. Around gay men using male changing rooms or gay people adopting or gay teachers, and the suggestion used to be that somehow they would be a danger to children or they would corrupt other men. Or we remember the conversations, don't we? Why do you say it's absolutely different, Sarah?
I would say, firstly, because me and Nicola were absolutely on, anti-Section 28, pro-equal marriage.
No, but it's about it's about what Paris Lee's calls imagined
we are not a
fears.
continuation of that. And these are not imagined fears. We are not imagining Paris Green in that prison. We are not imagining the cases where men have, maliciously gained access to female spaces.
Here's a really good real-life example, OK? So Girl Guides now allow boys who identify as girls to join the Girl Guides, OK? So that means that a child-born male, clearly with a penis, would be allowed to sleep overnight with girls. And there is a safeguarding issue there.
OK, that is not an imagined fear.
No matter what we call them.
Yeah, but I think you're kind of doing the Girl Guides a disservice by not assuming that they're going to be doing risk assessments on these things. I do a lot of youth work and we risk assess everything.
Right, but my question is that an imagined fear or is that a real fear that you understand?
I mean, I've got an 11-year-old
So hang on,
daughter.
I was asking the question, sorry.
But then you're assuming that 11-year-old trans girl is actually a sexual predator.
No, we're not. We're assuming that there may be natal males who, I don't know, I can't adjudicate on someone's internal state, but I know that when I was a teenager, there were natal males in my class who exhibited really disturbing behaviour. Okay. How are we going to protect from those kinds of natal males exploiting this loophole?
The issue here, though, is that parents are not...
laugh at this.
Parents are not even allowed to be informed by the Girl Guides that this might happen. So if there's a parent sends their daughter off camping, they wouldn't be informed that there could be a natal male boy, there could be a 14-year-old boy in with their 10-year-old daughter in a tent.
OK.
And no one's allowed to know. But how can there be informed consent there? So all we're asking for is not don't allow this, don't allow that. It's just think of all of the people involved, because there's the trans child to be thought of, but there's also the girls.
Most of the messages we've had from our audience are to do with domestic refuges. Miranda says, I feel very strongly that trans women should not... Oh, sorry, this is about all women shortlist, having said that. But Miranda says, on all women shortlists, I feel very strongly that trans women should not be on all women shortlists. I'm not transphobic. I don't care what anybody does to themselves, how they present themselves, what they call themselves. I totally accept them in society, but they're not women, never will be. A woman is a person who has a womb. I will never accept a trans woman as a real woman, and therefore they would not be eligible to run as female candidates. I would have no problem with them running as trans candidates. What would you say to that, Rebecca?
Does that then mean that people who've had hysterectomies can't stand on all women shortlists if they need to have a...
No, I think that's very different. I mean, natal sex matters. Being female matters. If you talk about you know, the reason we have women-only shortlists is because there are things that happen to women because we're female that make it harder for us to have careers in politics.
Okay.
There is sex discrimination.
Just let me read this tweet from Pam. This is about refugees. If a trans woman is in the unfortunate position of needing a women's refuge, it's because she's a woman, not somebody pretending to be. Harry says, I have no problem with transgender women, nor indeed with anyone who does not identify as specifically male or female. I can, however, understand that some people might feel uncomfortable in changing rooms or toilets, particularly if the person has yet undergone full reassignment surgery. I'm going to bring in Emma, who got in touch with us, one of our viewers right now, Emma Carnier in Blackpool. She was in a refuge, a domestic violence refuge, last year for 7 months. And Emma, what's your own view?
Hi, shouldn't be in a refuge. It should be a safe space for women only. I wouldn't have felt safer if it had been either self-identifying women or transgender women there, either as workers or as fellow people living with me.
Can I ask, Emma, can you give us some insight about why you don't think you would have felt safe?
Partly. But also, I needed that women-only space. They understood what I'd been through, and I needed to feel safe. And I wouldn't have felt safe if it had been somebody there with a penis. That I would not have felt safe at all.
Clara, how do you react to that?
I mean, it's a valid concern. I'm not going to say that this isn't a valid concern, but this is all about whether you look male or whether you look female at the end of the day. Chances are that trans women aren't going to be flaunting their anatomy in front of you in a refuge or other. And so it's whether you look at someone and you
their
look
anatomy
male.
flaunting. People can be perceived as male.
You know, I mean,
and people are
much,
very good at doing that, being able to spot.
Much broader.
So this
beamed.
boils
It
down
is-
to,
it is
do you look male or do you look female?
But that does, you know, it does matter. Do you look male? Do you look female? Because it's so socially relevant in our society. You know, how we treat people depends so much on whether they're male and female. The fact
Okay,
that
let me ask Emma then. So let's say there is a trans woman. Let's say a trans woman was in the refuge that you were in, and they looked like you, but they had a penis. You knew that. Would you have felt unsafe?
Yes, just because I don't trust any men at the moment. So that would have made me feel unsafe. Because to me, they're not a true woman has menstrual cycles. You know, it's different. It's like a sort of a separate camp. They're not male, they're not female, they're transgender.
Rebecca, why don't you talk to Emma and tell her why that's offensive for you to hear that?
My mother doesn't. You know, she doesn't have a menstrual cycle. You know, but she's a natal female.
But she in the past.
Yeah, but you were talking about the present time, and do you know what estrogen cross-hormone sex therapy, hormone therapy does to the libido of a natal male? You know,
we don't know whether someone would necessarily be on estrogen therapy because it's self-identity. So we don't know whether
no medical treatment is necessary. Simply identifying yourself as female would be all that would be required to come into that women's refuge with Emma.
Okay, I want to ask Clara and Rebecca, legitimate questions raised by Emma, would you say, for example? And often the worry is that if a person does raise what might be considered to be a reasonable or legitimate concern, they are immediately described as transphobic. Do you agree that that happens, first of all, Clara? And what can we do about that?
It can happen, but I think it's a two-way street. I think that any arguments that trans women make are also shut down, and if there was a word equivalent to transphobia, it would be used towards trans women.
That's also fair, is it, Sarah?
I think it's so important that we actually do have conversations like this, and it can be an enormously febrile discussion, and that's of no benefit to any of us, because, you know, like the constant theme that we've been coming back to is that the issue that we're all trying to contend with is male violence. And for example, in terms of refuges, the women's movement did extraordinary work, 70s, 80s, establishing refuges. That is information and learning that's all there for trans women, trans people to learn from in terms of establishing your own specialist services. Actually see, you know, there are things that trans people experience that I will never experience, and the services you have should respect that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody in the trans community is saying that there shouldn't be spaces that protect vulnerable people of whatever gender they are. I mean, I think that if a situation were to arise where somebody felt threatened, then I'm sure the people who operated that place would investigate and say, OK, this person has until yesterday been sporting a big bushy beard and sort of, you know, rocking up as Jack at the shop, whatever.
I will also say that, you know, I've talked to a few people that run rape crisis centres, and they do. I mean, they want to help everyone. You're saying we should have trans-specific services, but they're actually already under capacity for the services they can provide to a single gender.
It's such a
which is a
heinously
societal issue.
under-resourced sector. So
Absolutely.
the increasing pressure to provide gender-neutral services is even worse. I mean, it means that...
Sorry, Sarah,
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry. I wanted to ask a final question. Do you think there are people who are transphobic, who are exploiting ignorance in order to whip up fears?
I think there are definitely people who are transphobic and who wouldn't want to have the kind of conversation that we've had here, who wouldn't want to acknowledge the risks and the dangers that you face as trans women. And I want absolutely no part of them. I don't think that that kind of hatred has any place. I really think that we should be working together to address how do we all address male violence in a way that approaches all of our specific situations.
It's about balancing the rights, isn't it? You know, transgender people need to be free from discrimination. Women, females do, you know, all of the different categories need to be balanced and it needs to be fair. So we're just asking, because I think the women's voices have been silenced really up until now. So we're just asking to be able to be heard and not to be not to be told that we're transphobic, because this is a great environment today. This is unusual to have two women and two trans women here, and so this is a great start. You know, we can start talking, because you know, nobody wants to take, you know, rights away from anybody.
I mean, the way Nicola articulated that then, she used women and trans women. Is that okay? Well,
I mean, yes. I mean, speaking personally, I'm not going to nitpick over my sort of the labels that we assign people. I mean, I'm happy to be called a trans woman. I'm equally happy to be called a woman. You know, it doesn't. But some trans women would take great exception. But I mean, the thing is, what I welcome about this conversation and the opportunity to make the film is that I had some very considered conversations with people from both sides of the fence, if you like, and that's what I welcome in this forum, this conversation, was that it was nuanced and it was considered and respectful. And it's when on social media people really get het up and get hot under the collar. You know, that's when you sort of think, look, let's just talk, can we?
Those aren't the true voices of women. You know, it's people like us that just have common sense and to be reasonable, really, and to share rights. That's what we're asking for.
I'm going to pause. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, all of you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you. I've got some breaking news to bring you, but I'm afraid my tablet is not working, so I can't bring you that right now. So I will tell you that Theresa May is due to give a speech any moment now, setting out the government's new policy on house building in England, and of course we will bring that to you live. Before that, people in many parts of the UK are without water after pipes burst following last week's freeze. Millions of people in London and the South East have been told not to use water for anything that isn't essential. Let's speak to Jeff Marshall, who lives in Streatham and has had no water since yesterday, and Sarah Anderson, the landlady of the Old Vine pub in Wadhurst in Kent, where they've had no water since Saturday morning. Hello, both of you. Thank you very much. Right, how's it going, Sarah, pub landlady, I mean?
Very depressing, actually. Still no water.
Right, and how are you coping?
Well, we're coping. Today we're closed, but it's been disastrous for the weekend for us customers. Yeah.
And have you had much communication from your water company?
No, not really. The odd text. Communication has been very poor.